There are things a family uses without knowing who pays for them. Not out of malice, necessarily, just out of the particular blindness that comes from never having to look. I'll try to be accurate about this. My name was on the streaming accounts, 3 of them, accumulated over years in the way subscriptions accumulate, one justifying the next. My name was on the shared phone plan, 4 lines, because I'd set it up when my father's plan expired and it was cheaper to consolidate. My payment method was attached to the grocery delivery account. My father used twice a week. I covered a portion of the utilities under an informal arrangement that had never been formalized. Because formalizing it would have required acknowledging it. And acknowledging it would have required a conversation no one wanted to have. I'm not listing these things to construct a case. I'm listing them because they're relevant to what happened later, and leaving them out would make the story incomplete. Diane is my sister. She's 3 years older than me, and has lived in our father's house on and off since her divorce, which was 6 years ago. Her son Connor is 9. I have no quarrel with Connor. He's a child who didn't choose his circumstances, which is the one thing I kept returning to whenever the situation felt like it was hardening into something uglier than I wanted it to be. My friction with Diane was real but not extraordinary. She borrowed things without asking and returned them sometimes. She made decisions about shared spaces as though they were hers alone. She had the specific confidence of someone who has always been absorbed back into the family without condition. And so had stopped considering that conditions existed. The argument, when it happened, was about something small. I don't remember the exact shape of it. I remember the tone. Mine, which was controlled but not warm. I remember the way Diane looked at my father afterward, and the way he looked back at her, and the way neither of them looked at me. 3 days later, my father came to find me in the kitchen. He said I needed to apologize to Diane and Connor. He said it in the tone he used when he'd already decided something, and was presenting it as a reasonable request rather than a verdict. I asked what specifically I was apologizing for. He said it didn't matter, that the family needed to move forward, that I had a way of making things uncomfortable and an apology would smooth it over. I said, okay. He nodded and left the kitchen. He thought we'd reached an agreement. We hadn't. I just hadn't corrected his assumption, which is a different thing. I want to be clear that what I did that night wasn't planned in advance. It was more like clarity arriving in a form I recognized and decided not to argue with. I sat with the streaming accounts first. Cancelled each one separately, which required navigating 3 different cancellation flows, each designed to make you reconsider. I didn't reconsider. The phone plan took longer. Transferring lines to individual accounts required a hold queue, and then a patient conversation with a representative named, according to his introduction, Gerald. Gerald was professional. I thanked him when we finished. The grocery account I simply removed my payment method from. I unlinked what was mine. I didn't delete anything that wasn't mine to delete. I packed efficiently, which is something I've always been able to do. I left things that belonged to the house. I took things that belonged to me. By 6 in the morning I was in my car. By 7 I was at my friend David's apartment across the city, drinking his coffee and explaining only as much as he needed to know, which wasn't much. I didn't leave a note. I couldn't think of anything true enough to be worth writing down. My father called at 2 in the afternoon. I answered once because I'm not interested in theater. Not the theater of dramatic exits, and not the theater of dramatic silences. He was angry in the way people are angry when they've encountered a consequence they didn't model for. He said I'd left without apologizing. Said I was being a child. Said I'd embarrassed the family. I let him finish. Then I explained that the accounts had been in my name, that I'd closed what I was paying for, that I hoped they'd find the right alternatives without too much difficulty. He said, "You can't just do that." I said, "I did." He called 4 more times that day. I read the notifications. I made dinner. I did not call back. What I know about the weeks after comes, mostly from my Aunt Carol, who has always moved between the family's versions of events, with a clear-eyed patience I've never fully understood, but have always been grateful for. She told me my father called her trying to piece together the finances. She told me she sat with him at his kitchen table and walked him through the numbers. what I'd covered, for how long, what it would cost now to replace it. She said he was quiet for most of it. She said at one point he said he hadn't realized, and she told him that was exactly the problem. I wasn't there for that conversation. I've thought about it more than I expected to. I have an apartment now. It's smaller than I thought I'd want and quieter than I thought I'd notice. My father has not apologized. I haven't asked him to, which I'm still not sure how to interpret about myself. Carol says he's been different, quieter. She says Diane has her own phone plan now, which she mentioned the way you mention a small and overdue thing. Whether my father and I find a way back to something is a question I visit occasionally, like a room I'm not ready to renovate. I don't go in. I don't seal it off. I leave the door the way it is and I go about my day, and most of the time that feels like enough, and sometimes it doesn't, and I haven't decided yet what to do with the difference.